p.m. I'm just gonna get
Richard,
ready.
how do you want to be addressed?
Oh, Richard.
Richard, we're live.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Kubek. I'm privileged to be chair of Abraham's Table of Long Island. Since December of 2015, we have brought people together from the three Abrahamic religions, the great faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, to dialogue, to find mutual understanding, and sometimes in programs like this one, to find common purpose as we address social problems from the perspective of our faiths. And we're proud tonight to be offering you this program, which is titled, How Does Dr. Martin Luther King's Message Relate to Your Faith? And importantly, words into action. That's our emphasis tonight. So, Dr. King, and this weekend, celebrating Dr. King is a time to reflect on his very powerful appeal for what he called the beloved community, a community of justice and peace. But achieving the beloved community here on Long Island, which is going to be the emphasis tonight, achieving that community is no simple task. The King Center defines the beloved community as, quoting, a global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth. As I read this, think of Long Island, a global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. This is our challenge. This is what we call words into action. And sometimes we forget that Dr. King's soaring, beautiful, gorgeous words were a call to action. I'm going to ask that our technician put up a photograph that I'd like to share with you. I'm going to screen share it now. Going back to the 1950s, to the beginning of the modern civil rights era, a time when Dr. King wrote his beautiful letter from a Birmingham jail. Again, soaring, beautiful words. But we forget he was arrested, as was Rosa Parks. I was hoping that image would come up, but it hasn't, so that's okay. They paid a price as their words became action. And now, more than 6 decades later, after the Montgomery bus boycott and their arrest, Dr. King and Rosa Parks, we're still struggling. We are among the 10 most segregated suburbs in the United States. A recent study, for example, by Erase Racism found that school segregation over the last decade has gotten worse, has increased. Today, 3/4 of Black students and 2/3 of Hispanic students here on Long Island are in segregated schools, that is, schools with a majority of children who are children of color. And that school segregation is rooted in our deeply segregated housing patterns, which Newsday exposed just last year with the problem of racial steering, of real estate brokers steering people of color to communities of color. And then there are the police practices, which again, Newsday exposed not long ago with overwhelming evidence that Blacks and Hispanics are more likely to be stopped by traffic police than are whites. So this is our challenge. And we are really grateful to have our panelists today. I want to thank for in particular the collaboration we've had first time with Newsday, in that Newsday has invited 3 of our panelists to appear in their column today, Asking the Clergy. And they are here tonight to expand on the beautiful words that they wrote in Newsday. But I would like to introduce our panelists at this time and our moderator. And let me begin with our moderator, Father Bill Bersati, pastor emeritus of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal Church in Wyandanch. Father Bill was my pastor. and a longtime advocate for peace and justice. I'd like to introduce Rabbi Lena Zebarini, who is the rabbi at Kehilioth Shalom Synagogue in Cold Spring Harbor, and is also a member of the Suffolk County Human Rights Commission. I'd like to introduce Fred Brewington, a well-known civil rights attorney and a certified lay servant in the United Methodist Church. I'd like to introduce our panelist, Reverend Earl Thorpe, pastor of the church in Garden City, which has a long history of social justice advocacy. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Isma Chaudhry, Board of Trustees co-chair of the Islamic Center of Long Island and a member of the Governor's Health Equity Task Force. For those of you who are joining one of our programs for the first time, you have an opportunity on our website to become a member and to get advance notice of our programs simply by checking the email option that's there. And for all of you, you will have an option to participate in this conversation by writing questions or comments in the chat, which we hope to get to at least some of them with our panelists. So welcome to everyone. This is really a pleasure to have you. And the focus questions tonight reveal where we're going. The first question is, what aspects of Dr. King's message most resonate with you and why? And as we move toward the action component, the second question, how does Dr. King's message resonate with other members of your faith? And what can be done to make his message more relevant to them? And lastly, the third core question is, what can people of faith do to make Long Island less segregated and more inclusive? So these are our focus questions, and I now turn the program over to our moderator, Father Bill, and we begin. Father Bill. You're on mute, Father Bill.
First glitch. Okay. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and certainly, as it's been proposed by Richard Kubek, we have a daunting task before us in take these words into action. So, with looking at that first question, what aspects of Dr. King's message most resonate with you and why? And perhaps we could start with Dr. Isma Chaudhry.
Greetings, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Richard and Father Bill, for putting this event together. Honor for me to be here with the co-panelists, Rabbi Reverend Thorpe and Mr. Brewington. And these are, I consider everybody on this screen as people who have inspired me, and I consider them teachers. So with your permission, I'm going to start off with just sharing some of the views to your first question, Father Bill. So Dr. King's views and teachings on justice, equity, love, diversity, which are the ideals of a beloved community, that particularly resonates with me as an individual who follows the Muslim tradition and who has, as per the guidance of the tradition, does recognize the Jewish and the Christian tradition and the ethics and the faith values of those traditions. So as a Muslim, the most important and valuable right that Islam recognizes is justice, and not just justice, justice with compassion and justice with dignity. For not just one race, one individual, one faith group, but for all humanity. The Holy Quran guides us not to let prejudices incite us to discrimination and oppression. In the Quran, justice is the central theme that guides our personal, our communal, our political, and moral consciousness for all the communities. And it just does not talk about the communities, for the institutions. It's extremely important that we understand both aspects of it, which Dr. King had repeatedly put the emphasis on. It's not just the function for a community to be just, but also the institutions where racism is unfortunately prevalent. Quran guides us that all the prophets, starting from Adam to Noah, Abraham to Moses, Jesus to Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon all of them, conveyed the same message to establish an equitable society, beloved community. And that society, that community should be responsible and responsive, both to uphold the values of equity and justice for all. I'll share with you one of the verses of the Quran, chapter 4, verse 135. O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to God, even if it is against yourself, your parents, your relatives, or against the rich or the poor. And Dr. King reminded us that as a member of the society, remaining silent and inactive is not an option. And in his dream, he talks about not to be judged by the color of skin or by the content of rather by the content of one's character. And I'll just share another verse of the Quran, which says, the most honored of you in the sight of God is the one with the best conduct, and not by the color of the skin or by the tribe or the nation they belong to. So those are few areas where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's message of equity and justice is very dear to my faith, my personal and the collective ethics. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautifully stated. Maybe we move on to Rabbi Lena Zabarini. If I pronounced it correctly.
You pronounced it perfectly.
Thank
Thank you. And it's such an honor to be with all of you tonight, and to have been included in an observance of what for me is perhaps the most important American holiday, the one that commemorates a human being who called us to be our best selves and engaged and inspired and motivated hundreds of thousands of people to work for peace and for justice. And it's an honor to be following in those footsteps in a very small way. In Jewish tradition, we're taught that the age of prophecy is over. But for me, Dr. King was a prophet, and he drew upon the tradition of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible when he quoted Amos, "Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." Well, those words are more than 2,500 years old, but Dr. King's call to envision and embody them here in our own country and in our own lives continues to call to us today. And when he said these words and other words from the Hebrew Bible, they resonated with people, as they should. He brought these ancient words into our lives today. Dr. King lived the call of the prophets, who were not about telling the future, but about shining a light on the ways that the Israelites were not living up to the commandments to love the stranger and care for the widow and orphan, and remember you were a stranger and especially love your neighbor as yourself. Dr. King's faith in and commitment to love was a foundation of his life and teaching. When he accepted the Nobel Prize, he said, "I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality." If he could believe this, if he could trust in love, despite what he had seen and experienced, then so can I, and so can we. Today, after these years of pandemic and political unrest, decades of centuries of racism and anti-Semitism that we're seeing more and more manifest on Long Island every day, so many of us feel ground down. Dr. King had faith, not the faith of, as Lewis Carroll wrote, believing in 6 impossible things before breakfast, but faith that in Jewish tradition is emunah, steadfastness. In a sense, that commitment and hard work would lead to progress, and a firm belief that hearts could be turned. This is what I draw upon today. The steadfastness that he inspired in so many, the well of faith, of emunah, and of belief and trust in the humanity of other people. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Now we can move to Pastor Earl from Garden City Church in the Garden.
Thank you, Father Bill, and thank you to all my colleagues. It's a terrific joy to be with you, and I am I'm impressed, and I just want to acknowledge the rich, diverse panel that we have here. 2 women, interfaith, men of color, and so I'm grateful to be a part of this wonderful panel. The question to me, for me, is one that resonates deeply. Many Baptist preachers will call on Dr. King as the symbol of the civil rights movement, but we know that there are so many more in this civil rights journey. And so the message that resonates most profoundly with me is not the most celebrated speeches that he gave. It really is the searing critique that he had for this political society. It's often very easy for us to look at the lofty oratorical flourishes that Dr. King had, and he was a terrific orator, a wonderful pastor and preacher, and can bring you to his knees even if he was just reading the phone book. But we tend not to look at his deep insight and analysis of this world. And when we look at some of his writings and his words, we see a critical mind that is unflinching and, as you said, Rabbi, steadfast in his approach of critiquing society for the betterment of humankind, which is rooted in the love of God for everyone. And so the message for me is simply this: if we don't take a hard, critical look at our society, we are not doing the work that will help change our society. And I would add, we probably haven't gotten to the place we need to be because we are afraid or we don't want to acknowledge the place that we're in. But it's only in acknowledging the place that we are in and where we have been that we can finally reconcile and move to the place where we need to be. But without an honest accounting of where we are, and Dr. King knew that all those years ago and was unafraid, even to the detriment of his own life, to call out and to acknowledge and to push people, systems, governments to acknowledge where we are and where we need to be if we are to be the people who we say to be. So that is, for me, simply what the message of Dr. King is for me. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Now, Fred Burlington.
Father Bill, thank you so much. And it is my pleasure and honor to be part of this panel with Dr. Chandre and Rabbi Lena and Reverend Thorpe, Dick Kubek, thank you so much. And Father Bill, thank you for being our shepherd as we go through these narrow pathways. But if you will, allow me to join in to the voices that have already spoken to widen the pathway a bit. To look at this work, this body of work, this legacy left to us by Dr. King that takes us well past marches, that takes us well past those things which we remember when he said, if you're going to be a drum major for justice, where he told us things that were much greater than just his dream, when he took us soaring through history as he stood in the temple there in Memphis just before his death. Let's go past that. Let's go to a time where Dr. King took the concept of faith and hope and put together with it strategy and human desire for change in a society where people of many hues and many colors were not coming together as God would have us come together, where Dr. King wrote a letter from the Birmingham jail and not only spoke about his plight, but the plight of those individuals who were in our own community, in his own religious community, who he called upon to say, don't just talk the talk, I need you to walk the walk. And where Dr. King himself taught us serious impactful actions where he marched people, young people, old people, women, men, out of the churches like the churches in Birmingham, like the churches in Memphis, like the churches all over the South and part of the North, where he said, we will not respond with violence. We will respond with peace, but peace does not mean that we are conceptually or implicitly agreeing with the abuse that you place upon us. His peace brought two other things with it, and I like to refer this as Dr. King's PAC, P-A-C. He brought peace, but he also brought action. And the action was to make change in those systems, the institutions that had for so long, for at that time, 300, 400 years, but now almost 500 years of degradation of individuals based on their color of their skin and their place and origin of their birth. And we've now seen that, and Rabbi, you mentioned it, we're seeing hate spring up all over our own Long Island. We've seen hate groups marching through Rockville Center and through parts of Bayshore and through Patchogue. We've seen individuals scrolling swastikas and putting up nooses in places for the only purpose to try and defeat building that beloved community. So what I take from Dr. King's legacy is one that I try to live not only in my Christian life as a United Methodist, who believes not only in personal holiness, but in social holiness, that we have to come together and march shoulder to shoulder, as Rabbi and I did just not so long ago, when we stood and said, hate has no place here. And we met at the Centerport United Methodist Church to raise our voices in unison together. And what a harmonious meeting that was. So if I have to think about Dr. King, I think about Dr. King just as I do as the center of the Christian church, Jesus Christ, who went into a temple as the money changers were making a mockery of the temple and turned the tables over and made it very clear that that was not something that he was ashamed of. So as we stand up and stand together in peace and in harmony, we also stand together in unison to organize, to try and make this world the place that Dr. King dreamed of. Those are my thoughts.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I guess we could just go through the three questions, as we, unless, would there be more that we'd like to develop on this particular theme? Anybody would like to contribute or add something? After having
Well,
listened.
if I could ask a question, I had a thought as Pastor Thorpe was talking about the fact that the beauty of Dr. King's poetic language wasn't as important as his critique of society. And maybe if each of you could tell us what aspect of Long Island today would you use Dr. King's lens to say, this is a structure that has to change? Which would be the one critique through Dr. King's eyes that you would see? Maybe we'll go the same round. Isma, what would yours be?
Sure. So first of all, it was the words that were just spoken by the three panelists were very, very inspiring. So, Richard, my view is we don't need separate lenses. We need one lens and look at the structural racism in our institutions. One lens. Education, housing, health, communities. We have to look at it. And unless, I'm going to share a quote which was shared with me by one of my professors in medical term, but I apply it to life. And his wisdom, he said, the eyes do not see what the mind does not know. So for our eyes to see that, we have to really, really walk the walk and also understand, as Fred had said, that our personal holiness it cannot be achieved till there is a social holiness. So those are my 2 cents.
Rabbi, what would be your one structure that you would critique in Long Island and say, this really stands out to me as a violation of what King stood for?
I think I have learned from Elaine at Erase Racism that so much of our inequity here on Long Island is grounded in housing. And Long Island was built on segregation, and that continues to manifest in every aspect of life. The fact that, as was mentioned, the schools are segregated is based on how the housing, how housing has developed. I grew up in Manhasset, and there were only a handful of African Americans in my schools, and I don't think those numbers have changed significantly. And that was a terrible thing for all of us.
Fred, you've had so many battles on behalf of King's critiques. Which one would stand out for you? You're on mute, Fred.
That was just for Father Bill, so he wasn't the only one that did it. I said, well, haven't fought enough battles yet, Bill, Richard. One of the things that I would, however, say that looking at the issues that Erase Racism has set out, and Rabbi mentioned them, one of the things we have to really look at is the fact that with those institutions, the people that are in the ability to say things don't say things. The people that are have the capability to change some things don't want to address those issues, as Dr. Chandra mentioned, that institutional racism is something that is a sickness. And if you don't put the right medicine to the sickness, you never get well. And that's a reality. Our politicians run from those discussions. Our politicians and elected officials don't engage in that because it's not popular. Well, as long as it's not popular, we're going to still keep remaining sick. And until we address those issues and we force elected officials to run away from their own fear and run into the need for interaction and responsiveness, then we're going to remain sick. And I do say that from a realistic standpoint, because over and over again, when we see situations that are very bad, rather than address them and even apologize in certain situations that they do exist, we run to the defense of the bureaucracy. And those institutions themselves exist for no other reason except for to feed themselves.
This is our fourth Abraham's Table Martin Luther King event, and every year in our program we've quoted Dr. King saying that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. So I think this is what you're saying in terms of not looking away from what needs doing. Pastor Thorpe, you were particularly strong in Newsday today, if I may. You spoke about the fact that many people have shamelessly and sophomorically distilled King's human rights message about America's poor and disenfranchised people into pithy and hollow quotes without applying them to society. That's pretty tough assessment of critique. So what aspect of our Long Island society would you lift up and say, we need to change this?
Yeah, it's what I'm called to do. It's reality. A lot of us grew up with parents and relatives who just told us how it is, not how we want it to be. The one thing the challenge is that everything is interconnected here. Rabbi talked about housing. We talked about structural inequality and racism, structural racism. And the challenge is understanding what we can do to break policies and practices that embody and engage and further more institutional racism, structural racism. And so we can't bifurcate the system and say, okay, well, just do this over here as if it's not going to have an effect on something on the other side. And so I'm not arguing for anyone to call people out as racist. We need to address their racist behavior as such, because those racist behavior leads to policies that feed upon that policy to create systems of racism. For example, many of us know what it is to try to get a loan. Well, you have a loan officer who is doing their job, and that person may look like you or me. However, they see someone that comes in and they say, I want to give this person who may be a poor person an opportunity. So they look at the credit report, they do all the things that they need to do. And they say, listen, I have to go talk to my manager. The manager looks at it, says, I don't know, let me look at someone else higher up the VP. The VP says, no, we don't want to have this person here. Not because I don't like this person personally, I don't know them, but they're poor. And so once you find out they're poor and you don't have opportunities and ways for them to overcome that or to get a loan, even though they might be hardworking and able to pay the money, then we perpetuate this kind of narrative where they cannot overcome. And the person who is the original loan officer is saying, I would love to do this, but they have to make sure that they are feeding their family and that they have a job. And so the system works so much that that person would then move up into the ranks because they have a bunch of people who can afford the loans. They get promoted to VP, and they continue to do the same thing, as you said, Brother Fred, that they won't speak up because it may cost them their job. And now they're embedded in the system that won't let them get out the system, because if they do, it would take away from their livelihood or what they have achieved in that whole notion. So we need to start looking at every institution and its interconnectedness and the policies and practices that deny people the right, the liberty, the freedom to at least live and survive. And that's at every level, from dog catcher all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so I don't have a neat answer to say, hey, just look at this. In Long Island, Long Island is a microcosm of plenty parts of America. And so we have to start thinking about this and living it and fighting for it every single day. And that's not what a lot of people signed up for. They just want it to be nice and neat and they're doing well and that's it. Oh, well, I'm doing okay. And if the people aren't doing well, it's probably their fault. And that's why I say what I say in my comments. And that's what I believe. And I think that's what a lot of the prophets always did. They, as you said, Rabbi, they just looked at the situation today and say, I'm not free of sin, but I can call out the sin because I am a sinner or I'm not living up, and we need to start doing this. Not me against you, but us together.
I guess it wasn't an accident that the prophet Jeremiah was thrown in a well in the hopes that he would stop commenting about what the Israelites should be doing. And he got out of the well, and I'm sure he can't still comment about what they should be doing. Father Bill, I'm going to turn it back to you.
I was just going to add something to this part of it, and then move on to the next question. I think one of the signs, I think a really critical point is the whole question of the schools and the push from certain interests in society to prevent even the discussion of these questions in schools, appropriate to the age group of the children. That it's banning books that deal with the racial conflicts that in the racial history, and because they're afraid their children will be uncomfortable. But then others are saying, if you're not uncomfortable about some aspects of our history, you really aren't learning history. There's because you learn history in order to you learn from it. You learn the history and learn from it to live better as a society. So I think that's something that several school districts on Long Island, school boards and things like that, really have to learn. I think that's something that where Dr. King's words would be applied in his teaching, not just naming the school, Martin Luther King School, but that the hearts and the minds of the people in the school, that we're trying to improve society, not just keep on repeating the negative aspects of history. Anyway, so maybe we should move on to the next question. How does Dr. King's message resonate with other members of your faith community? And what can we do to make his message more relevant to them, bring more people into the conversation and help, to deal with some of the conflicting thoughts and feelings that exist within our own communities and in the larger community of Long Island? So maybe keep the same order. We'll start with Dr. Isma.
So thank you so much, Father Bill. Only you can do that. You're reversing God's chronological order. But
I'm reversing it. I know. I realize that.
You're a brave man to do that. And it's very interesting because for me, it has always been easy because at the end, by the time my turn comes, I'm used to saying amen. And so you're not being kind to me at this time, but that's fine. So coming to your specific question, Father Bill, unfortunately, the systemic racism has rippled our social institution. And the ripples of that discrimination, which is at an institution level, at a level where we don't really check ourselves. we don't pause and we don't see that the news that we are reading, or if one group is being discriminated against, it's gonna have its effect. And we are seeing that more often than anything else. And so coming on to that, this systemic racism and institutional racism that inhibits an individual or a community's ability to fulfill their potential, whether it's individual potential or a collective potential of the community. And the Muslim community, it's very sad because it's a vulnerable community by faith. Being a Muslim, we have all seen the history of various bans specifically directed towards the Muslim community. And then the Muslim community represents further cultures coming from various nations, various ethnicities. So it's a very diverse religious tradition. So our community is very, very aware of of what it is to be vulnerable, and what is it to be vulnerable in America. Because this is supposed to be a land where you can pursue your dreams. And it still is. We have to make sure that each one of us are individually and collectively feel responsible for that. So coming to your question, the members of our community have been very, very aware of it because of an uptick of Islamophobia. And knowing that we are part of those vulnerable communities, we have been in the forefront of Black Lives Matter marches and community events, and making sure that we are standing together with our African American brothers and sisters and fighting this and raising our voices against discrimination, Asian hate, anti-Semitism, and reminders to ourselves that at the end of the day, if we are not responsible for anything that is happening within our communities, it's going to affect all of us. Thank you.
Okay, Rabbi Lena?
Thank you. So the question of how does Dr. King's message resonate with other Jews, and what do we do to make that message more resonant, more relevant? I think, you know, the Jewish community is and was, I think, deeply moved by Dr. King's call to the equality of every human being. The ground of our own teaching in Genesis chapter 1 is that humanity was created in the image and likeness of the divine, and that we all descend from one human. And our tradition says, the Midrash says, that was purposeful, so that no one could say, my ancestors were greater than your ancestors, as we all have the same ancestor. Jews recall our participation in the civil rights movement. I have congregants who registered voters in Mississippi and who were at the 1963 speech in Washington, D.C. And we remember with pride that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched with Dr. King and others from Selma to Montgomery. But that said, I think that Dr. King's anti-poverty work, the aspect of his call to recognize the injustice that's ingrained in our system, these aspects are both less known and less embraced. I know that in my own community, I need to teach about Dr. King's work with the Poor People's Campaign. And, people know the mountaintop speech, but they don't know that Dr. King was in Memphis supporting the sanitation workers strike.
Sure.
We have to make the connection that our own traditions, and certainly the Jewish tradition, has a position that society should be equitable. This year on the Jewish calendar is what's called a Shemitah year, the year where the land is supposed to lie fallow. And when the land lies fallow, you're not supposed to plant, you're not supposed to harvest. And also the tradition is that anybody can come and take, if you're a property owner, anybody can come and take from whatever happens to be growing. It is free to everybody. And every seventh cycle, there's a complete redistribution of land. The land goes back to whomever, to the original families, the original clans. That's what the Jubilee year was, a resetting, so that some families couldn't get too wealthy and others couldn't fall into permanent generational poverty. Now, I don't know that we're going to be doing a massive redistribution of wealth in this country, but I think that we need to recognize that our traditions don't just say, tra-la-la, we love everybody and everybody's in the image and likeness of God. That's all beautiful, but the rubber's got to meet the road. And I've been thinking of the words of Dr. Cornel West, who says that justice is what love looks like in public.
Mhm.
So, we quote Dr. King all the time. I shouldn't say we. I put up nice quotes of Dr. King when I was at the JCC. Hatred is too much to bear. I've decided to stick with love. We can't just talk about love. Justice is what love looks like in public.
Beautiful. Thank you. Pastor Thorpe.
That's pretty good. Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. For me as a Christian and particularly an American Baptist pastor, I recognize that the community of Baptists is not monolith. It's not one Baptist is all Baptist. There are disagreements, radical disagreements amongst the spectrum of Baptists, Southern Baptists, Anabaptist, Cooperative Baptists. I think, Rabbi, what you said was very prescient. When we look at the Civil Rights March and the Civil Rights Movement, the inclusion of so many people, not just Black folk, but all folk, I think what we get to is that, for me at least, is that if you do not realize that if it's happening to me, it might happen to you, then you're going to miss the point. I think too many times, and particularly in this society now, we are so divorced from one another that we don't think that what's happening to me, redistricting or bigotry, cannot happen to you or someone else. And so I'm always trying to remind us that when you see injustice, my mother would say it all the time like this: if you see a good fight, get in it. Because if you're not willing to argue and stand up and fight for someone else's freedom, liberty, justice, then when it happens to you, they deny you and you want someone to help you, you're gonna, why aren't you helping me? But you didn't do that for someone else. And so there's deep disagreement with me and a lot of other Christian pastors and people in my denomination, Baptists, and the so-called evangelical community. And I'm not saying some of them aren't evangelical, but we're all called to be evangelical in a way. But there's big disagreements, and I'm not sure that I know how to make Dr. King's message resonate with people who are, on the one hand, were against Dr. King while he was living, and now don't believe in Dr. King's message now, and have an alternate sense of reality and privilege in the world today. I'm not sure how to deal with that. I am sure that what I can do is to continue to speak up and to act in a way that is consistent with our biblical understanding of love, compassion, and a love that is radical, that changes, that is strong, that fights, that believes and forgives and hopes, and calls for repentance, and calls for acknowledgement, and calls for change continually. And so that's what I can do. It's a very deep question, and it's not one that I know that I can fully answer. So I just humbly say that I'm trying to do better, understanding that there's a lot of people who are just resistant to the real work of love in society.
Thank you. Fred.
Wow. As I sit here and listen to the learned words of my sisters and my brother, I'm reminded that there is and was, at the time of Dr. King's life, divergent views on what he stood for and how he stood for it. And understanding that, I say today that we are perhaps just as, if not more, divided than then concerning the messages that he sent to us. And Rabbi, I thank you, because people forget that Dr. King spoke as an anti-war advocate and spoke against poverty. And you're right, he was dealing with a labor issue that crossed over into the racial issue when he was in Memphis and just before his death. Calling for boycotts of Wonder Bread or Tasty or whatever the bread was that he was calling for. And at that time, utilizing the economics of a real situation in society to make social change, understanding the interrelationship between finances and the power and the purchasing power of an entire formerly enslaved people. So with regard to that, I think that we have such a great divergence now, even in the United Methodist Church, where we claim to be socially active. We have individuals that don't have a clue. And I want to just simply say that. And we've done a very poor job outside in other communities of bringing the whole message of what Dr. King tried to carry to the world. The world watched as dogs bit individuals and fire hoses were being sprayed on peaceful protesters, and was in awe that this was happening in the great America, the place of greatness of democracy, and where people can come, your huddled masses, yearning to be free. People were appalled, and yet even today, we don't take all that to heart. We have short memories of the things that I think are really important. Father Bill talked about schools, and I understand and remember the portion of Proverbs that talks about training a child up in the right way, and they will then not stray from it, not depart. Well, if we don't teach about great pieces of literature like Native Son, if we can't have a conversation about the intricacies and the 3 levels of the story in To Kill a Mockingbird and what is going on there, if we can't talk about critical race theory and why it's important to look at that as we look at what took place post Reconstruction and with regard to the Black codes and Jim Crow, if we don't have a full understanding of that in our country, then it becomes very easy for us to say, oh, that's them, that's not me. Or it's very easy for us to look past the fact that someone is being placed in suffering in an immigration camp. we have a responsibility to each other and to ourselves to educate one another and educate ourselves. But as a community, we really have not done that nor held each other accountable to do that. Dr. King's messages are deep. I'm just talking about deep. I'm talking about Boston University deep. And when we talk about him, we need to understand that this was not just a man who stood in a pulpit or dazzled, as Reverend Thorpe said, dazzled hundreds of thousands of people with his oratory. This was a man that put together strategies that pieced things that were happening in the street with things that were happening in Congress and things were happening in the legal suite. And at the very same time, while people were going across a bridge, there were lawyers that were going in for injunctions to deal with the societal aspects of the needs to make change. At the very same times when individuals were being sprayed with water hoses, there were individuals that were figuring out, we're going to have to fill every jail cell, and eventually Bull Connor is not going to be able to handle everything. And why? So that the seams of society could be stretched to allow the message of peace and love through action to come in. And I think that's part of what we really lack today, is the reality that we have gotten away from teaching the lessons. And as a result of that, people think that it's more of a fiction than it is a reality.
If I could just add a dimension to the wonderful comments each of you made. I am the community outreach coordinator for a nonprofit advocacy group, Long Island Jobs with Justice. And my job is to bring together people of faith communities to address the kinds of things that Dr. King spoke about in the beloved community, that poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated. And so a few years ago, we gathered about 60 faith leaders in different focus groups. And we basically said, how do you preach about justice in your congregations? How do we do this? And one of the clergy opened one of the focus groups by saying, could we just face up to the fact that most of the people in the pews don't want to hear any of this? I'm wondering if any of you would like to comment on that comment. They just don't want to hear it.
Richard, I think that's right. I think, and Brother Fred, I think you are so eloquent in saying this. We are afraid to learn. We don't want to learn how to learn, and we don't want to challenge our own understanding of what we thought we knew. I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, we went to Sunday school, and Sunday school tries to teach the Bible to children at a level that they can understand. But at some point, we grow up and we have to learn for ourselves. And the most dangerous question is why? Because now we have to go deeper into that. Similarly, when I went to seminary, I was told, don't come to seminary looking to find God. You have to have God with you when you enter, because the idea of learning is to expand what you know. And we are so fearful. Even in school, we talk about critical race theory, which is being taught at a level in college and in law school, but we're so fearful of learning something new that might disrupt the narrative that we have so conveniently set for ourselves that we say, we can't have this. Imagine if you went to a library and they say, okay, let me have books on. No. We don't have books on that. Why? No, it's out of this world. It's not appropriate for you. But we do this in our schools. We do this in our society. We don't want to hear anything that is contrary to what we have been taught to believe. And if it doesn't fit with that narrative, then that is racist. That is other. That is radical. As if those words are somehow negative, except when we talk about the prophets, about Jesus, about any of the prophets. They were radical. They called people. They did everything that society now says we shouldn't do. That's what they did. But we say we are a God-fearing nation. And when we say that, we always say in our own context, a God-fearing nation, meaning God, a man with a white, beard, who wears sandals and has a white toga, and Jesus, blonde hair, right? We certainly don't say the Muslim. We have a tough time dealing with Abraham. And so we are fearful of looking at our faith. We are fearful of looking at our society, and it trickles down to every single aspect of our livelihood. And until we break the fear, then we will just be clanging cymbals, unless we really dig deep and say, there's nothing to fear. It really, if you learn more, it actually gives you the ability to understand why you are and who you are. And I think that's critically missing in our society. And that's just my piece on that.
So I would just like to press a little bit, because when I first began this work of mobilizing the faith community to address economic injustice, my brother said to me, wait a minute, you're mixing religion and politics. And I said, well, actually I am. And he said, I think very profoundly, we're Catholic. He said, I don't go to mass for politics. I go for peace. I don't want to be bothered with that, the 1 hour that I have in church. Any comments on that mentality? Because I'll tell you, when we had our focus groups, that concern was expressed by just about every clergy person, that people really are on an individual faith journey. They don't want to come to service and be bothered by these kinds of structural injustices.
I'm going to share a thought, and Reverend Thorpe, what a pleasure to hear you express yourself. It's God bless you, and everybody who's over here. So every year, coming to your point, Richard, every year we celebrate one day a week the wisdom of a man who dared not just to set a path, but who was afraid, who saw the now, the then, at that context, and who was afraid because he was a visionary and he could see what, if we stay in our own bubbles, what's for all of us in future. And that is something that we do not embrace. That when we talk about Dr. King, we do not embrace that he was fearful for us as individual communities and as collective communities, as the Muslim, the Jewish, the Christians, and every other community, because each community has the vulnerable. And unless we take care of everybody from every community and understand it's not just one individual's fight, we're not going anywhere. And that's why we're stuck.
It seems to me that the basis of our three traditions are about creating societies that protect the vulnerable. I think, though, that sometimes conflicts. There's an individualism to Americanism, right? That whole, westward pioneer spirit. I'm going to fend for myself. That's very strong in American society, and I think that does clash with the ground of our teachings. It's a tension. But I wanted to say something about the fear. And I think that many of our communities are fearful, and that our fear, our vulnerability, is a barrier to love and to engaging in coalition and the beloved community. And I'll speak for my own community that anti-Semitism is a real thing and is pervasive. You know, the same way I don't think any community is free of the racism that pervades our society. No community is free of the anti-Semitism that is inherent. And so I know that I have congregants and colleagues who want to know that they're safe before they enter into coalition. They want to know that what makes Jews feel safe is going to be affirmed. And I think there's something about working together. You know, I try to say to people, like, that's what coalition means. Like, we're not going to agree on everything, right? Like, we come together to do what we agree upon. But I think vulnerability and fear is real, and people have been hurt. Sometimes people have been hurt by the past, you know, which we project into the present. And sometimes we're hurting each other here and now. And I think that needs to somehow be part of the conversation as we, you know, the small interpersonal pieces of how we come together and build trust and connection, even as we address these larger, essential, systemic aspects.
Mm-hmm. Richard, you asked the question about the pastors that were there, or the religious leaders that were there, that spoke about that their people in their pews didn't want to hear about these the politics. They came there for whatever they came to their service for. But one of the things that people have to realize is that when you come to church on Sunday, that is not who you should be as a person of faith. That your faith is a lived out thing. It is something that you live not just on Friday night or Saturday or on Sunday, whatever day the Sabbath may be, but it is part of who you are, and it is who you are in your everyday life. One of the things, and I just love the fact that we're able to bring our faith traditions here together in this discussion, because I was reminded that in the United Methodist book that we refer to as our book of discipline, which is our book of laws, church law, we have in there the social principles. And part of the social principles, and I was just looking for it and I found it, we have a whole section that's focused on political community, the political community. And I just wanted to read a short portion of it because I thought it would be helpful in understanding what the call is in dealing with this as we think about Dr. King. It says, love is the fulfillment of the law and the end of the commandment. Very excellent things are spoken of love. It is the essence, the spirit, the life of all virtue. It is not only the first and great command, but it is all the commandments in one. Whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are amenable or honorable, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, they are all comprised in that one word, love. The United Methodist Church involvement in political systems is rooted in the gospel imperative to love our neighbors, to do justice, and to care for the vulnerable. And if people don't understand why it is important for them to engage and not be of the world, but to be in the world, as they exercise their religious beliefs, whether or not it's in the Muslim faith or whether or not it's in the Christian faith or whether or not they are Jewish or Sikh or otherwise, that the responsibility is to call into account those things that we claim to be true in our own teachings. And simply saying that this is what I do on Sunday, but Monday through Saturday, the hell with it, pardon my expression, is not acceptable. And that's exactly why it's important. If pastors are saying that, what they need to then do is break people of that pew lock. And get them involved in understanding how their lives are generally affected by their own inaction.
Richard, Richard, I'm assuming that the person that you were talking about was not a family member, or was a family member?
The person who said I go for peace.
That's right.
Was my brother. Yes.
Was your brother, but he didn't listen. He missed that Sunday when Father Bill spoke about how and Dr. Isma reminded us that our individual salvation is absolutely connected to our social salvation. It is all three of the religions that are represented here, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, all attest to that. It is not a Descartesian model of I think, therefore I am. It's more of an Afrocentric understanding that I am because we are. And so we cannot divorce our own personal piety from society. And we do that too often. The idea that we don't want to be political, I have news for everyone, particularly in our books. You know, every prophet, every messenger was political because they were always speaking to society and those who were in power. And we know this is clear. So if you can't remember that, just remember where 2 or 3 are gathered, there will be politics.
You know, John D. Rockefeller was a very devout, I think he was a devout Baptist, Pastor Thorpe. And a reporter said to him once, how can you be such a devout Baptist and then in your business practice destroy other businesses, including your own brother? And he, you know, his phrase, he said, Sunday is Sunday and Monday is Monday.
That's right. That's right.
This is what we're up against. Father Bill, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is an amazing discussion, you know, and I think, how late does this, we end before?
5:30. We have time
5:30.
for one more question.
You know, I think that if we just have one more question, I think it's perfectly going to fill the time. But just to transition, I think one of the things that we do in our religious services is try to learn those connections, and that's the thing. And it's, you know, as I was struck by Mayor Hempstead Village Mayor Hobbs in the article in today's Newsday about we need to embrace diversity. But I then add to that, but to embrace the diversity, but learn the meaning of interdependence and solidarity. You know, and all of this as we in our faith traditions can help motivate society towards the common good, and you know, to people to understand that the way I live, you know, John D. Rockefeller, I mean, I want to don't want you to use him as an example. What he was doing was not for the common good, you know, you know, so that if what I'm doing, if it's not for the common good, it's really not ultimately for my own good, you know, it's to my detriment, ultimate. And I think that kind of a way. Anyway, not to talk about that, but just to move to the next question, which is really, I think, is a natural sequence. What can people of faith do to make Long Island a less segregated and more inclusive community? And maybe we can start. Maybe we'll start with go in the chronological order of our faith traditions with our Jewish rabbi. Please.
Just toss into the question, Father Bill. Somebody in the audience said, "And what can we do to lift up the poor as well?" It's one of the chat questions. What can we do to lift up the poor?
Okay.
So thank you. I think there are 2 things that we need to do. One is that we need to come together, and the other is that we need to take action. And I think we need to push against the increasing factionalism of our society, and we need to create connections and build relationships between our communities. Our colleague Isma models that every year when she opens up the doors of the Islamic Center of Long Island to faith leaders and community leaders and others during Ramadan to say, come in, let us feed you, let us care for you, let us get to know each other. We need to do that. We need to be willing to go, and we need to be willing to open up our own doors. We need to, move beyond our awkwardness, our concern, our fragility, and our fear. Although, I do need to say that fear sometimes, in all of our communities is justified. I'm told that the gunman who entered that congregation in Texas yesterday was let in because people thought he was an unhoused person in need of shelter. So they let him in at risk of their lives. There's real concern, and we need to reach beyond ourselves. Isma posted on her Facebook page last night her prayers for that congregation, and it meant a lot to me. So that, that sense of standing with and for each other in solidarity, we need to do that. We need to do that more. And, and then that solidarity needs to be not only of the heart, but of the feet. When Heschel walked with King, and was asked about it, he said, I felt that my legs were praying. And, he taught us that prayers are promises, that, okay, here we are praying, but those are commitments that we make. And so there's work to be done here on Long Island. And if it's your passion to work on housing, or your passion to work on education, or your passion to work on voter turnout or environmental justice, we got to do it. That's it. Thank you.
Now, Pastor Thorpe.
I echo those comments, Rabbi. Thank you so much. It is true. I'm talking to my Christian brothers and sisters now. We need to start doing the work of Jesus Christ. And I've often said from my pulpit, I don't actually care if you believe in Jesus Christ as God's son or the theology of it. If you follow what Jesus did, he put his words into actions. He delivered food when people were hungry. He was an optometrist when people didn't have health care for free. Jesus Christ, that he got rid of things that were bothering people. He was a psychiatrist. He's like, he did all these things, and he did it. And he commanded the people that were with him to love one another. And he did not say it would be hard, but he did say it'd be worth it. So if we would just do that. And so we have the poor. We believe in poor, but not poor just in money, but poor in spirit. That's what the Beatitudes were talking about. So I implore our Christian brothers and sisters to really start taking heed to the message of Jesus Christ, not this Christian nationalism that we promote here in America, which says that you are blessed because you have stuff, or that your faith is somehow bigger because you are rich. It is not that. It is concerned with the least, the lonely, and the left out. And once we start concerning ourselves with them, then society as a whole, no matter what the religion or no religion, we will become a better world. So I implore us to start living out our lives in love and following the guidance of all the great, not just the great, the major, the minor, all the prophets of all the religions who believe in the fundamental value of human life through love. And if you don't know where that is, come to my church and I'll tell you about the one that I believe in, and we'll help you walk the walk and talk the talk. It's not grand pronouncements. I'm not saying we're going to change the world day by day. I mean, change the world in one day, But anything that we can do to help further that, we have an obligation we must do.
Hey, and Fred, what's your thought?
Well, first I gotta say, preach, preacher. Um, fear. The shadow of fear is something that people live in and day out. The fear to come out of the familiar, the fear to engage, the fear of the unknown. Well, that is something that in the Christian tradition that I come out of, that we are taught to not to live in the shadow of fear, not to be crippled by fear, because fear serves as an opportunity for the evil to come in and take a foothold, and then you end up dashing your foot against the rock. I guess one of the things that I would then just try to point out to all of our brothers and sisters of all backgrounds and all faiths is that in this time when we see so many things facing us as a society, the pandemic, which we really didn't mention today, but that's a factor. That's pushed people further away from each other. That's pushed us further into our darkness. That's pushed us into situations where we've then started to stew in our own juices, if you know what I mean. And as a result of that, one of the things we really need to do is start to talk about what it is we need to do to make that change and not let it just be talk. We need to speak. We need to sacrifice, we need to stand, and we need to support each other. Those 4 S's that are key to making us be the community that would be the beloved community that Dr. King spoke about, what he preached about, what he dreamed about, is exactly where we need to be today, especially at this time, because we will emerge from this pandemic. We will come into a springtime of our society when we're going to have the opportunity to be with each other and see each other and speak with each other. And as a result of that, we need to be able to stand with each other and support each other and speak to each other, not in fear, but in that love that we've all spoken about, which is the greatest of them all, to love each other. And that's really what we come together for, is so that we fulfill the prophecy of all these great religions, is that we do seek to love one another as though we would love ourselves, and then make that a reality for everybody that we come in contact with. Don't keep it to ourselves. Spread it around.
Amen.
Richard, I just want you all to know that Fred Brewington is now my favorite lawyer in the world. So
He's mine too.
I don't know what I need to do to hire him, but I want him on my team. That's all I'm saying. The doors of the church are open after he has spoken.
Amen.
And now we move to last but not least, Dr. Isma Chowdhury.
Thank you, Father Bill. And this is where I'm used to saying amen and ditto. But I just share quickly two, 3 points. First of all, to my Muslim brothers and sisters, and myself first, and everybody who is from a faith of or ethics. Quran guides us that God will not change the condition of people until there is a change from within. And Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, one of the prophets of God, he said something very profound. He said that whoever sees an evil in the society, and the evil of our society is discrimination, the divides, the lack of ethics around humanity. So whoever sees an evil, let him change it by his hand. And if he's not able to do so, let him change it by his tongue. And if he's not able to do so, then he should think of it as bad and evil in his heart. And that is the weakest of the faith. So our responsibility is to stop it, be proactive, make sure we are bringing ourselves together, we are forming that cohesive community where we stand up for what's right against power. And the aspiration of equity and justice is not a movement that is easy to accomplish. It requires courage, it requires integrity to change the attitudes of injustices in the oppressors and decrease the pain and the despair of the ones who are oppressed. And that is our individual and collective responsibility. We need to make sure we are together in a continuous, coordinated, relentless, proactive engagement. And be together despite the uphill battle. We can only accomplish if we are together. We cannot do anything by remaining in our own little silos.
Father Bill, we had a question from the audience. Maybe we'll end with asking each of you to respond to this question. The question was, based on Dr. King's action emphasis, what should our marching orders be as we leave today? Now, this person asked about voting rights, but we'll let each of you give your own version of the marching orders to our audience and to one another as we leave tonight.
Let me start, Cynthia. Just real quick, I'm just going to say, go back and watch this film again and pull out the essence of what it is. And within it, you will find, within the fibers of this discussion, marching orders, not only for yourself, but to spread to other individuals. I think that we've covered some very important things so that we don't go backwards. I would say go forward and utilize this. This is a wonderful, I think, a discussion that people just don't have. So I would encourage people to utilize this.
Mm-hmm. It will be on YouTube and people can watch it afterwards. You can just go to the link and it will be up on YouTube for a number of days. Anyone else want to give us a marching order before we leave?
Hold our hands together, open our hearts, and open our minds.
Yeah.
I would simply say this, do something, do something and find someone who is talking about what you believe in and what you want to change, and unite with them and work with them. Again, I know of a place on 68 Osborne Road that is welcoming any person who wants to work towards the betterment of humanity and society. We'll work with you. So whatever it is that you are, whether it's voting rights, whether it's working with the poor, they're all collected, they're all interconnected. Whatever it is, just pick that and find people who are talking about the things that you care about, unite with them and do something.
Rabbi?
Yeah. Jewish tradition says that when God gave Torah at Mount Sinai, everybody heard it in their own way. So we each have a piece of the deep wisdom of the divine, and it is incumbent upon us to manifest that wisdom in the world. And that's what, Dr. King's wisdom was his wisdom, and it inspires us, but we need the wisdom and the passion and the heart of every single human being to put their hands to the plow.
Father Bill, what's your marching orders for us?
Marching orders, I think the question that someone asked, how do we lift up the poor? I think to seek to connect with the poor, with poverty. I think that's the lesson Jesus taught us, that he always was like a heat-seeking missile. He would always go to the poorest, the most outcast, the lowest member of society. The first people to greet him were the shepherds, the lowest caste of society, at his birth. So I think that in all of our traditions, we would have that lesson. And I think that's something that Dr. King would say to us in terms of our society right now. How are we connected to and helping the poor?
Well, this has been an extraordinary conversation. among extraordinary folks. You really have been a blessing to Long Island. And I want to echo what Fred said. If you want to do something, go back and listen to this again, or tell your friends to listen to it. It's on YouTube. This was really an extraordinary call to action, to take the gorgeous words, the rhetoric, the beautiful poetry of Martin Luther King, and to turn them into action, because we have a lot of work to make Long Island a beloved community. Again, if you're new in our audience to our program and you want to get our emails, just go to our website, which is www.abrahamstableli.org, and the place to sign up for our emails. And thanks to our audience, and again, so grateful to each of you for this brilliant, brilliant conversation. God bless everybody. Stay well, stay healthy, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Peace.